During 2019, 7.4% of the population of Latin America and the Caribbean lived in hunger, which is equivalent to 47.7 million people. The situation has been deteriorating over the last 5 years, with an increase of 13.2 million undernourished people. Over the last 5 years alone, in Latin America and the Caribbean, we have an additional 13.2 million persons who are undernourished, much of whom are children and women. This has a direct impact on educational outcome and health outcomes. The issue of food security is interrelated to educational output. You have to understand this. So the drop we are seeing in educational performance is directly linked to the issue of undernourishment and food insecurity. It is estimated that in 2030, hunger will affect 67 million people in the region, a figure that does not take into account the repercussions of the COVID-19 pandemic. In 2019, almost a third of the population, or 191 million people, were affected by moderate or severe food insecurity.
That was Guyanese President Dr. Irfaan Ali highlighting concerns about hunger, malnourishment, and food insecurity in the region at a recent dialogue on food security in Latin America and the Caribbean, facilitated by the Development Bank of Latin America. Ali recited alarming statistics. Approximately 30% of the population in Latin American and Caribbean countries were affected by moderate or severe food insecurity in 2019. That's almost 200 million people. In the same year, almost half of the region's poorest households had shifted to less healthy diets. Predictions are of 67 million hungry people in this region by 2030, excluding those impacted by the COVID-19 pandemic. Amidst these distressing numbers, Ali questioned why there were not more efforts to raise public awareness on the issue.
The question is, why are we not hearing about this in Latin America and the Caribbean? Why isn't these statistics the headlines in newspapers? Is it that we are hiding this reality? Or is it that we don't have the political will to shout this out to the population? These are questions that are extremely important if we are to address the problems.
According to Dr. Ali, if trends continue, some countries will not be able to achieve the second of the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals for 2030, zero hunger, a circumstance that he says is likely to drive social unrest.
So when we look at SDG Goal 2, as the Executive Director of the World Food Programme would have said to us, we focus on Africa and other regions. But Latin America and Caribbean is at a real risk of not accomplishing Goal 2 by 2030. As of March 2022, food inflation across 20 countries in the English and Dutch-speaking Caribbean increased by 10.2%. Food inflation alone increased by 10.2%. This can be linked to the insecurity problems we're having in more and more countries. The population becoming more and more uneasy. More persons responding by taking to the streets.
For the Caribbean, Guyana's president zeroed in on what he believes is one of the biggest barriers to creating an efficient regional food network, apart from labor shortages in the food production sector.
We face labor shortages. We face difficulty in assessing transport service in a timely manner. This is mainly caused by liquidity constraints, forced by producers, increased costs of transportation services, and disruptions in the supply transport services. In the Caribbean, this is our greatest problem. No transportation system to move food across the region.
The region, Ali says, was facing a confluence of contributing factors all at once, and he called on regional heads to invest in creating a food system that could withstand the rigors of conflict, sanctions, or war. As a model, he drew attention to an agreement between Guyana and other CARICOM nations that would result in a 25% reduction in the food import bill by 2025, do away with major trade barriers, and give way to more access to agricultural lands and industry research technologies. Ali called on his colleagues across the region to take urgent collective action towards improving food safety and eliminating hunger instead of trying to go it alone.
If food is a fundamental human right, just like healthcare, and we recognize that it causes severe inequalities, then how are we going to design a system that keeps food out of conflict, that keeps food out of sanctions, that keep food out of war? This is a tough conversation that we must have, because ultimately it is the poorest in the society that are most affected. And as the statistics is showing us now, it is not a vulnerability that only exists in the least developed countries or developing countries. It can affect all of us.